My name's Carolyn Poynton from Manchester, Bury. I'm going to record this today, not this one, in a minute, is because I'm correct about Nigel Farage. I knew he was a fraudist.
From the Times and the Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Manveen Rana. For Nigel Farage, the anti-politician politician, 2026 was shaping up to be a year of surging poll ratings and gathering momentum. But now, he's hit a glitch.
I've got to ask you a question about this £5 million gift from this crypto billionaire. I'm getting comments as you and I are speaking. This man needs to tell us, what has he done with the £5 million? Get him to be truthful. Nigel Farage, please, what has happened to this £5 million gift?
With all due respect, what's it got to do with you?
Since the news broke of the £5 million gift, Farage has appeared flustered and at times furious with the growing media scrutiny.
Let's be clear, it's an unconditional gift. I can spend it on cars if I want to. It's entirely up to me, right?
So, Mr. Farage, how much of that money have you spent?
Look, it's literally none of your business.
And the revelations about his personal finances didn't stop there. Earlier this week, there was the news of his lucrative role with a gold bullion company.
I've got to tell you, I'm very impressed with this company, and I'm very pleased and proud to put my name to it.
And then...
The Times is reporting how Nigel Farage has built a £4 million portfolio alongside his partner Laura Ferrari in the past decade.
He declared in 2017 that he was skint. That's the word he used. Now from then he's gone to being skint to having 5 properties, 4 of them bought with cash. Now how did he manage that?
And it's not just the media who are asking questions. The MP for Clacton and the Reform Party has stirred up a storm in Parliament.
Just after Brexit.
The member for Clacton has apparently raked in £2 million over his past 2 years of service as a member of Parliament. Just yesterday, as we heard, £270,000 for 12 hours of work. It is frankly obscene.
What exactly do we know about Nigel Farage's finances?
Not much.
Do his millions undermine his man of the people image? And could this prove to be his political Achilles heel?
Yep.
The Story today. Will Farage's finances lead to his downfall?
Yep, it will. Well, it should do.
When I was a very young journalist at The Spectator magazine, I started following UKIP in about 2011, 2012, now at which point the party had been going for almost 2 decades. But that was a moment when they were starting to get real traction.
Times columnist and leader writer Sebastian Payne has also been a Farage watcher of some repute for a decade and a half.
Partly because the Conservative Party was very exercised about the EU issue long before the word Brexit came into the lexicon, but also because I could see something was happening, and it was very much on the Kent and Essex coast, where you had a lot of communities that felt economically deprived. They felt abandoned by mainstream politics, and Nigel Farage appealed to them in a way. And I can remember when I interviewed him, he said to me, you could tell UKIP members because they had their bomber command ties on from the Second World War. So that was very much the vintage of those people. So I spent endless days and weeks down on the Kent and Essex coast when Nigel Farage was starting to make headway, particularly in the 2014 European elections, then of course with his bid in 2015 to become the MP for Thanet South, which did not work.
And that was with an earlier guise of his political parties, that was with UKIP, one of the longest running. As somebody who's watched him up close, you know, he has a reputation for being a great political operator, for being great with people, a great speech maker, charismatic. I mean, just describe his style from what you've seen.
back in those days, he really brought back the town hall political meeting where people had given up on this a long time ago. I think it was Tony Benn who said that Britain used to be a nation of town hall political speeches, now it's a nation of book festival goers. And Nigel Farage brought back the thing where he would get anything from tens to hundreds of people to come out on a Friday evening and hear his rabble-rousing speech. And I think particularly in that era, when politicians were seen as maybe a bit identikit, seen as very metropolitan, he came across in a way that was authentic. Now, of course, like all politicians, it is still a shtick, right? In the same way that Andy Burnham had his shtick as being Mr. Manchester, Farage had his shtick as the pub-going, beer-swelling, smoking man of the people. But I think there's also another side to Nigel Farage as well, which you've seen when you've spent enough time around him, which is that he's very thin-skinned and he's very tetchy. And I first really saw that in the Thanet South campaign, when it looked as if he was going to break with the past and actually become a member of Parliament for UKIP. And he didn't win that. The Conservatives won that seat, a candidate called Craig McKinley, who's now in the House of Lords. And in the final days of those campaign, he was very angry, very tetchy with his staff, very frustrated that you feel the campaign was going away from him, and that contrasts with the jovial side that a lot of people will see when they see him out and about on the media.
You're so right. He is definitely tetchier than most politicians. I remember doing an interview with him years ago, and he clearly got very annoyed, threw off his microphone and stormed off down the stairs in Millbank, and I remember having to run after him. That sort of became almost his trademark. He is very tetchy when he's criticised.
And he would say it's pugilistic against the establishment, and he would say that there are people, journalists, the mainstream media, as he would call it, that are out to get him, and he is therefore pushing back against that. And when you're in an era where journalists are not that well trusted or liked by the public, it does kind of work for him.
As you said, he was the man of the people who you would have a pint with in the pub. But he was also somebody who was known as a city trader. You know, he had his background as a sort of city white boy done good. He'd made his money, or that was certainly the image he gave, you know, wore tweed a lot, sort of seemed to be comfortable in city crowds as well as with ordinary people. And yet, in 2017, after he's had his Brexit success, he does make a rather unexpected announcement. Take us back to that moment.
So the Brexit referendum was a very odd moment for Nigel Farage, because obviously this is what he'd spent his whole life campaigning for, but in the campaign itself he was sidelined and he was not actually a part of the main Brexit campaign. And of course UKIP had failed in terms of the 2015 election, so he announced he was leaving mainstream politics, and he essentially, with his wilderness years, you know, he wasn't really doing that much, but in 2017 he basically said he was 53, he was single, and he was skint.
53, separated, skint. Yeah, great.
Why was skint?
20 years of doing this.
And even though he'd had that city career, Nigel Farage had said he basically had given up a lot of prospective wealth to focus on politics. And at that moment, there was not that much going on for him. You know, he was not involved in Parliament, he was not involved in the Brexit debate, and he was still just a UKIP MEP at that point.
I mean, he was still a well-paid MEP with expenses and presenting gigs, but he, as far as he was concerned, was skint. Things have certainly changed. Just describe the financial journey he's been on since.
So the sort of second coming of Nigel Farage starts in about 2020, and you can link that with the launching of GB News, the rolling news channel, where Nigel Farage became its star presenter, and at its peak, I think, was presenting 3 or 4 nights a week. The Nightly Farage programme had the biggest ratings on GB News, and that is when he started to earn 6-figure serious sums of money for his presenting at that point. But at that same point, he also starts to pick up some side hustles as well, and we know about all this because, of course, a couple of years later in 2024, Nigel Farage does finally become an MP, and all of his finances become public through the Parliamentary Register. So it's not only his GB News salary, he's also got a Cameo, which is normally celebrities, or maybe washed up celebrities, doing short videos. He earns a terrific amount of money for doing those, but perhaps the most bizarre thing is selling gold bullion, direct gold bullion.
Well, I bet no one ever told you before that you can put gold into your pension and that it's been producing returns of over 10% a year, year after year after year.
So he built up this whole second career of outside earnings alongside, of course, his generous salary as a Member of Parliament. At this point, he's now really quite a wealthy man.
And the cameos, as you say, an unusual
And
move
that's
for
why
politicians, but it does
that's
land
why
in trouble.
that fucking
It
Alex
does,
Hilton
and
act.
some of the cameos, there was one that was infused with language used by the IRA. There was
doing what they're
another
doing.
cameo
Yeah,
as well
the IRA.
that seemed to refer to drug gangs, I believe, at that point. So they're quite unedifying, you might say. Nigel Farage did a lot of them from his home during the pandemic, and you could see them in his home at that point. And I think John Bercow, the former Speaker of the House of Commons, is the only other mainstream politician to engage in this, but it's clearly been a very lucrative side hustle for him.
So, as you said, it was when we sort of started to see his parliamentary interests, the money he declared, that we started to see some of the side hustles. What's even more interesting is the stuff that wasn't declared.
Yeah.
Tell us about the £5 million donation, which has really got him in hot water now.
So this is a man called Christopher Harborn, who is a crypto tycoon, I believe you're supposed to say, and he has been a long-time backer of various right-wing causes. He gave money, I believe, to the Conservative Party, but in the run-up to the 2024 election, it's been revealed that Christopher Harborn gave Nigel Farage £5 million. Now, that is not a donation to UKIP or the Brexit Party or Reform Party. It's to Nigel Farage personally. And this was not declared. Now, some people would say Nigel Farage was a private individual. Whoever gives him money is their business. But a new rule came in so that any member of Parliament has to declare their income the year before they become an MP. Ironically, a European directive that meant this has to happen. And Nigel Farage did not declare this £5 million. It was reported by The Guardian. And that has landed into his second investigation by the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner on whether he broke parliamentary rules. And there's been a lot of questions on why was this money given, what was it meant to be used for, and how it's being spent. And the answer is Nigel Farage has given a whole bunch of different answers to this. Sometimes he said it's for security. He's also said he could spend it on whatever he likes.
It's an unconditional gift. I can spend it on Ferraris if I want. That'd be entirely up to me.
As he told Nick Ferrari of LBC, and essentially he said it's none of the public's business, but it is the business of the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner.
And that's why he's coming a cropper, because there is an investigation into this now, because it wasn't declared and it fell into that period of a year before he came to power.
He wants to be a part of government,
that
and then
was
it's the
because
public
people want to know
right
what
to
might
know.
be influencing decisions about politicians, which seems fair. You described his
he wants to
reaction,
be the Prime
which
Minister with the
has been
public have a right to know.
He seemed to go into hiding for a while. He seemed for once to be reluctant to be all over the media. Just describe that sort of period of self-exile and how he's come out of it, because this does feel like a very new Nigel Farage.
So Nigel Farage has been omnipresent in our politics essentially since the 2024 general election and the rapid rise of reform, and obviously the party has won several by-elections. He had an amazing result in May's local council elections where it completely wiped out Labour in big parts of their traditional heartlands. But Nigel Farage has sort of disappeared because he doesn't want to answer questions about this £5 million donation, and he stopped doing press conferences. He used to do quite regular, almost weekly at times, press conferences. Again, another old political intervention that he's brought back, and instead just does pieces to cameras where he's not asked these questions. But he did do a broadcast round very recently, and he came across incredibly badly. I would say throughout this long 15-year period from 2011 onwards of following Nigel Farage, it is the tetchiest and the most on the ropes I've ever seen him, because he clearly knows that he's messed up here, and people I've spoken to who've talked to Nigel Farage in private about that, he has told them he realises he has messed up, because the £5 million, it's an enormous sum of money, particularly in the land of British politics, where compared to, say, America, donations tend to be much smaller than that. And I think for the first time, it is challenging his man of the people shtick. And you mentioned, Naveen, this point that, he is the Dulwich educated city trader who comes across the man of people. That's always been the paradox of Nigel Farage. But for some reason, this £5 million seems to have cut through that and caused some real damage to his reputation. And when he did those interview rounds, he didn't want to answer questions about it, and he was pulled apart. The most interesting one was on the BBC breakfast sofa, which is normally for politicians. It's the place you want to be because you get to speak to Middle England, and the BBC presenter Sally Nugent forensically pulled him apart, and I think he came across terribly.
So, Mr. Farage, how much of that money have you spent?
Look, it's literally none of your business. If I've given it to charity, but the truth is, I haven't. I know what it's.
You haven't spent any of it?
It's none of your business. It's literally none of your. How much of your salary do you spend on fare, on petrol? It's none of your business.
I think it is the public's business to know.
No, it's not
what.
the public's business.
Well, it's being investigated by the Parliamentary Standards
Yeah.
Committee, so it's
Yeah, well,
somebody's
let
business.
them
You're saying you need
investigate it.
security, a legitimate point.
Yeah.
How much of that money have you spent on security so far?
I'm sorry, I know I'm not going to answer that willfully.
Well, it's doing the public's best
And we
interest,
should
and what
say
was all that
Nigel
about
Farage
time
has
for?
denied any wrongdoing in relation to not declaring his £5 million gift from Christopher Harborne. He said, and I quote, "The rules are very clear. There is no obligation to declare something that is an unconditional, non-political, personal gift.
Yeah,
The Parliamentary Standards Inquiry into this is yet to deliver its verdict." Coming up, the
well,
scandals
because they're
keep
prepared to shut
mounting.
up,
We'll be
as
back
usual.
in just a moment. Sebastian, you've been
Because
describing
they've been paid
how
off
this
to shut
£5
up,
million
that's
donation
Well,
from
well,
a
yeah,
crypto tycoon, as we must call them, has really rattled both Nigel Farage but also some of his supporters who don't quite know what to make of this. On
I
top
know
of
what it
that
is.
come a succession of headlines about his
That's
other
why they're not
personal
talking about
finances.
him, innit?
So let's begin with his property portfolio. Just
His
describe
main
it for
film,
us.
not both.
So going back again to 2017 when Nigel Farage called himself skint, he has now amassed 5 properties, and as the Times has revealed this week, there is his 2017 village property which was owned with his second wife Kirsten Farage, but it's now occupied by his daughter. That is well known about. But then you've also got a beachfront property that was purchased in 2020 for £500,000, and that was under Thorn in the Side Limited, which is one of Nigel Farage's media companies, which overlooks the beach. But then you've also got a beachfront renovation project that was purchased in 2023, again by Thorn in the Side Limited, and it's been given planning permission for a £1 million demolition and luxury 3-storey build. Then you've also got, in May 2024, a Surrey Woodland Lodge that's Grade 2 listed 7.5 acres that was purchased for £1.4 million in cash, with another £350,000 spent on extensions. And then finally, in November 2024, there was an Essex property, which is a 4-bedroom detached house with a heated pool, that was purchased for £885,000 by Laurie Farage, who is Nigel Farage's partner, I believe. Now, he claims that is his Clacton constituency residency. Now, once again, Nigel Farage denies any wrongdoing. It's his money, he can spend it as it wishes, but not all of these properties have been declared to the parliamentary standards. Now, Nigel Farage says because some of these were purchased by his companies, they don't need to be out there. But once again, this is a sign of how wealthy Nigel Farage has become from 2017 until now.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, it's
It's
a sign of how
also a
well
sign
he's
of
become,
how
because,
much
as you
he's
said,
willing to
many of these
kind of
properties,
lie
they're not mortgaged. These are being paid for outright,
to the people.
which is surprising
Yeah.
to most people. It again just raises that slight sense that he's not being entirely transparent.
Yeah.
I mean, has
He's
he
a
done
liar.
anything wrong? Will there be implications? Or is it just that it just raises more question marks?
This one is about question marks because, again, you don't have to declare absolutely everything you've got in terms to Parliament. It's about your income. And some MPs are more transparent than others when they come to it and realising that it's quite bad for their reputation. But on the property front, I think the question you will be saying is, how did he afford all of them?
Another revelation this week has been about
No,
his
we don't
role
want
as
it
an
right,
ambassador
yes,
for
okay.
gold bullion. Tell us about that
Obviously a
and why
lot
it's
less
proven to be
money.
so controversial.
So as well as crypto,
Keep
Nigel
making
Farage
it
loves
go on.
gold and has done for quite a long time. And he's
So we
become
don't want
a
to be
brand
prime minister
ambassador for
whatsoever.
direct gold
It'd be
bullion, which
lying.
is essentially doing social media and TV adverts praising gold bullion.
Why choose Direct Bullion? Well, I've decided this is the right company to be with. Why? Well, there are 4 key reasons.
And it emerged this week that he's been paid £270,000 for 12 hours of work promoting this Go dealer. That's double what he was paid last year. And it is £22,500 an hour. That is a lot of money for gold bullion. And once again, there's no suggestion he has done any wrong by it. It's been fully declared, it's in the Parliament rules. But it's a judgment question. Is this what MPs should be doing? Advocating selling products, essentially.
And that raises many questions. One will be, is there a conflict of interest?
Well, Nigel Farage, of course, is a backbench MP. He's not a minister, he's not in government, and he's not in a position to change policy towards crypto or gold bullion, in fact. But of course, all this comes to the fact that reform has been ahead in the polls for a long time now, and everything Nigel Farage is done through the lens of a potential future Prime Minister. So there are questions right now in terms of what he is advocating, what that could mean if there is a reform government.
And the sort of sums we're talking about, £270,000 for about 12 hours work, that would be difficult when you're telling nurses and school teachers and people who earn a fraction of that in a year that they can't have any more.
Well, since the last election, Nigel Farage has made £1.3 million, and that makes him the second highest earning MP behind Rishi Sunak, who has a very well-remunerated role at Goldman Sachs, Microsoft and Anthropic, of which Rishi Sunak donates a lot of that to charity. So there's a big difference between that and what Nigel Farage is doing. And I think this is starting to raise a question, I think, about is this really the anti-establishment tribute that he has said to be in the past? Now, if he was to become a minister in a future government or even Prime Minister, it will be a question of does he continue this or does he not continue this? So far, he said it's none on people's business about how he earns money and what he does with it, but it is starting to challenge God. We saw that in the recent Makerfield by-election. And I've spoken to some pollsters who did focus groups as a very focus group constituency group, the focus on Andy Burnham there. And
We even know how to know about the King's finances, so why would all to know about his?
Through, in a sense of, why is he doing this? Why is he earning so much outside money?
Because he's a dodgy bastard fraudist.
And then Seb, you mentioned crypto. We haven't talked about crypto yet.
We don't want him to be a Prime Minister.
Nigel Farage's ties with the crypto world.
So it's not just the donation that you talked about from Christopher Harbour, he's also involved in a crypto startup with Kwasi Kwarteng, the former Conservative Chancellor.
What do we know about that?
Well, I can't confess to be a crypto expert, but it is a company that is set to make a lot of money if there were changes in crypto legislation to liberalise some of the restrictions around it. And this is fascinating because if Nigel Farage was to be Prime Minister and was to loosen regulations around crypto, it could benefit him personally on that front. And I don't think there's any precedent on that of someone being paid in advance of being a minister for something they've spoken about. And Nigel Farage really believes in crypto money. This is not just an idea to earn money. He gave a speech where he talked about crypto being the Big Bang 2.0 and has criticised the Treasury and the Bank of England for being too slow on crypto regulation.
There's a global boom in the trade in digital assets, in the use of stable coins, in the usage and investment in all forms of cryptocurrency. We've literally turned our backs on it, both the Bank of England and the FCA being guilty of this.
So it is clear it is something he really believes in, which is something he shares with Donald Trump. Well, but Nigel Farage, of course, spent a lot of time in America, very close to the US president and those around him, and they are crypto bugs as well. They believe in it, and so does he.
You mentioned the pollsters in Makerfield who said it was coming up increasingly. How do Reform supporters feel about this series of scandals?
All this is chimed with the rise of Restore Britain. Now, Restore Britain is another populist party, more to the right of Reform UK, set up by a former Reform MP, Rupert Lowe.
I am now launching Restore Britain as a national political party. I'm now going to dedicate my life to finding, organising, funding and providing hundreds of qualified candidates.
Difference is Rupert Lowe's not conning money out of people and he's not lying about his money.
And Rupert Lowe was kicked out of Reform after falling out with
that's why they kicked him out.
Reform's Home Affairs spokesperson and Mr Farage. And he has started this party that has gained huge traction online thanks to the support of Elon Musk, who has promoted Restore content, and Mr Lowe personally. And in the Makerfield by-election, Restore polled 8%. Now, some people say that's not a lot, but that 8% could have made all the difference when it came to Labour's vote. Now, in the case of Andy Burnham's popularity was so great, it wouldn't have made a difference.
The mainstream media they hated Nigel at one part, and then the mainstream media are all over it.
It could have caused Reform a real problem. And I spoke to Luke Trill from the Morning Commentary, and he said that in focus groups, those Reform voters who are flirting with the store had said that Nigel Farage was not seen as the new anti-establishment figure. That was Rupert Lowe, and that was Restore. And I think another poster I spoke to, Scarlett Maguire of Merlin Strategies, she has said that in some ways Rupert Lowe is seen as less risky than Nigel Farage, as less because of his manner, and he's got a kind of slightly traditional, old-fashioned Tory view to him, and is a bit less tetchy than Nigel Farage. But again, Rupert Lowe has shied away from a lot of interviews in the mainstream, preferring to do social media. But I think if that was replicated elsewhere, it would be a real problem.
Because the mainstream media are conning and lying, that's why.
He does feel Restore at his heels. They're biting away at his support.
Fucking Rupert Lowe.
In terms of what happens next, just talk us through the potential scenarios, because there is this parliamentary investigation into that £5 million donation.
Until he's the Prime Minister to be able to
inquiry is set to wrap up imminently. We don't know what that means, but one would have to think it's before summer recess in a couple of weeks' time. And if the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner finds Nigel Farage has broken the rules, again, Mr Farage denies any wrongdoing, but that donation was not declared, so it will be interesting to see how those two things reconcile.
And
but if the Standards Commissioner finds that he has broken rules, he could recommend sanctions, and those sanctions can include a suspension from the House of Commons. If that suspension is 10 days or more, then Nigel Farage can face what's called a recall petition. So that means if 10% of his constituents sign a petition, then that prompts a by-election. Now, given that there is more than 10% of Lib Dem, Labour and Conservative voters, you would have to think that there would be a by-election in that case. Nigel Farage, it's been reported, is now worried about a by-election, and before the rise of the storm, he would have said he will walk a by-election, and he will say, this is the establishment out to get me, vote me back in, and I'm going to take them on because I hate them just as much as you do.
Because he's given it all away to fucking Labour.
And Clacton-on-Sea is a place where Restore won't do very well. And Nigel Farage's majority was about 8,000 or so at the last election. That's pretty substantial. But once again, if Restore run and if they take away that vote, and they will say, no, this is not the establishment, this is you, Nigel Farage, because Rupert Lowe's antipathy towards Mr Farage is personal and it is passionate, and they would put that front and centre. So I still think it will be difficult, but you'd have to bet Nigel Farage would win that by-election, but even the process of that will continue to take some of the shine off him.
If there isn't a suspension, or if the suspension isn't,
I don't think he will.
10 days, and there isn't sort of any option of
I
recall.
hope they do the right thing.
There are other scenarios where this could be a worry for him. His party will be feeling the fact that he's losing his shine. They'll be feeling the fact that they're losing momentum. He's been in hiding for a while when he is doing media appearances and not going very well.
What's in their lives?
He does have a history of falling out
with
the parties he tends to lead.
The right thing and banning from the House of Parliament.
How often that seems to happen.
And not for 10 days,
Could that
for
be
a while.
For him?
When Nigel Farage ran UKIP, he became incredibly frustrated at the democratic structures as they were within the party, and be accountable to a chairman and a board, and he found it very frustrating. When he started the Brexit Party that then became Reform, it was run as a company, and he was the sole company director, and that's a very good insurance policy in case anyone wants to challenge you. That has actually now changed, and there is an element that Nigel Farage could be ousted. Now, I think that is unlikely because
I think he'll be ousted.
Reform is Nigel Farage and Nigel Farage is Reform.
No.
He is the party as far as most people are concerned.
No.
But you've seen people around him being ever so slightly critical, which, to look back through his past, is a very dangerous thing for Nigel Farage because he does not take criticism well.
No, he can
Robert
leave.
Jenrick, who
not
was, of
deserved
course,
the job.
recently a Conservative Shadow Cabinet Minister MP and leadership contender, defected to Reform, and he has said some ever so slightly critical things about the donation. The much more interesting one was David Bull, who was chair of Reform until very recently, and he said Nigel Farage needs to take a break. Now, he's insisted he just meant a summer holiday, but again, that has been seen, I think correctly, as a sign that they're starting to get a
Weakness.
sense that he is tired out and
He's
he's
weak.
not up for the fight ahead
Yeah.
to become Prime Minister. And whenever
We've
he's
got
asked
Lauren
by
Restore
this,
Park,
he
yeah.
doesn't just give a clear yes. If you ask Kerry Badenoch or Andy Burnham or even
I think
Ed
we've got lots
Davey,
to
they
do
say, yes, of
still.
course I want to be Prime Minister, I want to
I'm going to
lead
say I
the
think
country.
there's a lot to
Nigel
do.
Farage ever so slightly
Well,
hesitates, and
I'm-
there is
I'm
that
saying for
feeling
next year,
within Reform that this, for the
I think we
first
just
time,
have to
he
put up with
might not lead the
fucking
party
Andy
into the next
Burnham,
election.
Labour for a bit longer. We've put up with it now for the last God knows how many years. We could do it a bit longer. I'd say. A little bit longer to get Rupert Long. I'm not voting him. If I want to vote you, me, I might as well
That was
vote Andy
Sebastian
Bastard
Haigh,
Burnham.
columnist at the Times.
Mm.
Do you think Nigel Farage's finances will damage his
Yeah,
political
and
ambitions?
so it should.
We'd love to hear your thoughts, so do drop us a line at the story
No, it
at
should do. Well, we've done
thetimes.com.
that to look.
The producers today were David Whitty and Sophie McNulty. The executive producer was Edward Drummond. And sound design and theme composition were by Mal Lassetto.
Why can't
Thanks
this
for
Starmer
listening.
get away
We'll
with
be back
it? Nigel
tomorrow.
can then. Why should Nigel Farage get away with it if we want to be prepared to let Keir Starmer get away with it? Why are you going to be prepared to let Nigel Farage get away with it if we want no one was going to be prepared to let Keir Starmer get away with it? Might as well just let Keir Starmer carry on doing what he was doing, whatever that is. Destroying things like Nigel. It's the same thing. Ain't no fucking different.
What's our first category this week?
Our first category, Anush, is Uncomfortable Reform Interview of the Week. Plenty to choose from this week. So Nigel Farage has been having a bit of a time on TV and radio interviews, as you have written in your excellent column in this week's magazine on the decline of Nigel Farage's aura.
Yes, yeah. It seems like he's lost a bit of momentum because usually this is a man, no matter what you think of him, who is a very good communicator.
Mm-hmm.
He sounds like he's just having a chat with you. He always
Just
gives a
don't
straight
read him.
answer, and people really appreciate that in
No,
their
he doesn't give a
politicians.
straight answer, he's
But
lying.
not so much in the interviews that he's been giving lately on BBC Breakfast, to LBC, to Talk TV, to the Today
He's
programme,
lying.
where he's been
He's lying all this
asked
time.
repeatedly about the £5 million gift that he received, that we've discussed on here before, from the crypto billionaire Christopher Harwood. Let's have a little listen to how he's been dealing with those questions.
So, Mr. Farage, how much of that money have you spent?
And the late part, they're not going to want to let you
Literally,
get away with it.
none of
unless
your
you're
business.
with
If I've given it to charity, but the truth is, I haven't. I know what it's
You
spent
haven't
for.
spent any of it?
It's none of your business. It's literally none
No,
of your.
the
How
truth is
much of
you
your
haven't given
salary
any
you
of it to
spend
charity, you
on
mean.
beer, on
cheeky
petrol?
bastard.
It's none of your business.
Yeah, when you said you
He
were going to
thinks
put
that
it
if
to
you
the
watch
grooming
the
down scandal, you didn't do that.
England game tonight in a pub,
So there we have
knowing
it.
everyone will know you've got
Dirty
5 million in the
bastard.
bank, all the drinks will be
More
on you.
thinking about himself than the green gang.
Do you
All
understand
victims,
why
yeah?
most of
What about
us find
you
it
don't care about the green gang
absolutely
victims either?
impossible to believe
Yeah.
that someone who
Well,
lives on the
they'll
other
make
side
it
of the world, no matter how much he loves Brexit, as no,
to deal
I
with
don't
an
think anyone loves it
inquiry.
more than you and me, that they would go, you know
And
what,
also
Nige,
give some
look
money
here,
to the
here's
victims
5 million
for
quid, no
compensation
strings
when
attached.
it's
Do you
after.
understand why
The
that
compensation
is
money
not
for the
believable?
victims.
I think you'll find you voted in Hampshire, so I think you'll find that's where home actually. But whatever. Yeah, they may well do. And people inherit vast sums of money, and all sorts of things happen in life.
He's not your dad. You
And
didn't
as being a
inherit it.
victim,
How much has
I
been
will not
spent?
be voting for him.
I bought a cup of coffee this morning. Was that from that money or from what I earned from GB News? Or these are ridiculous
Why are they?
questions.
I really enjoyed the. If I gave it to charity, I didn't. Just the wandering down a side road with that idea, and then obviously recognising that wasn't something he was going to be able to claim.
Yeah, and then walking it straight back again. There's also a great bit with Nick Ferrari on LBC where he says, I could have spent it on Ferraris, I could have spent it on the horses, which, isn't doing so much for his reputation as just a man for people who lives an ordinary life.
Nor is his vast earnings from promoting gold bars.
Yes, so that story came out after I filed my column, but there's that that's also a bit awkward for him. He's like an ambassador for this brand that sells gold bars. He's received hundreds of thousands of pounds from them. And the Times has also just revealed that he has a £4 million property portfolio, reporting on him owning 5 mortgage-free homes. And let's not forget that it was only back in 2017 where he declared himself skint. And he's also been saying, as part of his justification for this money that he received from Harborne, that it was in recognition of what he'd done for Brexit, but also the fact that he gave up a lucrative career in the city to pursue this, political dream. Suggesting that the money that he makes from politics isn't enough to live on, but he seems to be living pretty well. I mean, he earns the most income from any MP from outside earnings. He has 9 second jobs.
Yeah. I mean, I think the truth about Nigel Farage is that he's not an MP. He seems to be rarely in his constituency, as you reported.
Like you say, he's not an MP,
May.
He doesn't want to be a
He doesn't own a home there. He has one of the lowest attendance records and voting records in Parliament. And like you say, his employment as an MP is an absolute pittance compared to the rest of his income. So what he is a TV presenter. He's made about £700,000 net, according to Register of Interest. He's a Gold Bullion promoter, nearly as much, about 685 grand. So his pay for those things is an order of magnitude larger than his MP salaries. Calling him an MP is like to kiss down on him. It's something he does, but it's very clearly not his main job.
Yeah, but taking and never give anything back to anything.
Because in your column you talk about this isn't just a sort of Farage problem, it's a reform problem, and obviously
to the
two
people.
are,
he has done exactly what he said he was going to do.
But they are on a lot of metrics.
And I think you're all going to lose all these big people are going to have to change their minds and start voting.
Yeah, and it's something we did discuss on the last episode of the podcast about how they're losing a bit of their momentum in the sense that Farage is always known as having the common touch of knowing where bang average public opinion is and knowing how far to push it in terms of some debate about immigration and things like that. But he's kind of lost a bit of that radar recently in terms of defending defending the candidate and making some sexist comments online and saying, we should be unapologetic about this. Actually, people in Reform think he probably ought to have apologised and then it might have been okay and gone away. And there's other examples as well. There are definitely to remain policy to rescind that status from people who already have permanent settlement here is not popular in Britain, even though, the British public generally wants an end to illegal immigration. They don't like that kind of policy because it feels unfair. And again, that's kind of like him slightly missing the mark, again with the comments before the Southampton riots too, associated reform with kind of street thuggery, which he's always tried to distance himself from. Never let Tommy Robinson near the party and condemned him as well. So there's just a sense that he's slightly off kilter for someone who's actually very good at having his finger on the public pulse, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, technically, we should say they are technically still ahead in the.
They are, yes, sorry, this was just a.
To the extent that anyone is, though, I mean, it's a really sort of mixed picture, isn't it? I think they're about 25% if you look at a poll of polls at the moment.
Yeah, that's right.
One stat that I found interesting, though, when you look at their local election results, if you look at the number of council seats won in 2025 and then in 2026, they go up. I mean, there were more council seats available to win, but also they went from, I think they won about 600 in 2025 and then this year about 1,400. It seems like that is an acceleration of their whole local election. Actually, if you look at their projected share of the votes, which I think it's a stat the BBC produces, where they extrapolate from the results what will happen in general election, that actually went down fairly significantly in this year's local elections, which is not something that's been talked about very much, but I think it does show that
bad
difficulty
apples
in
out of
building
the
a coalition
Conservative
of
Party,
voters.
and they are doing a bit
Yeah,
better.
definitely. And you've actually been speaking to the deputy leader of Reform this week, Richard Tice.
Yes.
The glossier,
Yeah.
more tanned.
I don't know if he is more tanned actually. I don't know.
Oh yeah, actually
If
they're
I
both
can't
quite
vote
tanned,
for
aren't
Rupert
they?
Lowe, then I
Clacton
don't know.
Coastal.
I wouldn't
Yes,
vote for
that's definitely where Farage is tan. All that time he spends
On the pier.
yeah. I think Richard Tice's tan may be acquired in Dubai, where I believe his partner lives. But yes, that was very much my uncomfortable reform interview this week. And it began. I want to personally thank the protester who kicked things off
Oh, no.
by.
I never know how to cope with protesters at events like that. Because this was an interview at a Statesman event that we were doing.
Sorry, yes, I should say the events team will be screaming at the their screens. This was at the New Statesman's Politics Live event, which we hold every year, and we get lots of interesting people on to come and talk to us.
And the occasional protester.
And the occasional protester. Quite often in the panels and the interviews that I do, I don't know what it is about me, or maybe it's just another example of our colleagues deciding to put me into an uncomfortable situation.
Yeah.
But there was a guy who got up almost immediately as it started, yelled, "Why are we platforming this climate denier?" And so I said, so I can ask him questions about his climate denial, which was one of the really surprising and shocking things. Although I know about it, there were kind of gasps in the audience while we were talking about this. So one of the questions I said to him was, look, this is, we've just had one of the hottest June on record, and a series of the hottest June days on record. It was 44 degrees in France last week. And I said to him, do you still reject the scientific consensus on climate change? And his answer was basically yes. Which is a pretty wacky position for just anyone who really considers himself a mainstream politician. But it's quite at odds with the British public, and I think that is something that other parties should talk about when they talk about reform, because I think 74% of Brits believe that the world's climate is changing as a result of human activity. There's only about 3% actually refuse to believe that the climate is changing at all. But his response was very much, it's just been hot weather. It was hot in 1976. And I mean, I think it's also an important thing to talk about with regard to him, because he is clearly a very successful person who does not reject the scientific consensus on anything else. He obviously trusts the science when it comes to flying on a plane.
He's double vaxxed, he told me when I interviewed him in COVID years.
Medicine, the internet, the banking system, lots of science and all of those things. Richard's absolutely happy with them. But this one thing which happens to conflict with the financial interests of his donors, one of them whom Christopher Harborn, not just a crypto billionaire, but also his main business is selling jet fuel. And some analyses have suggested that something like 2/3 of Reform's donations come from people with interest related to fossil fuels. So I think something that Labour should really get across about these guys is that, either they really believe this stuff, in which case they hold beliefs that are very much at odds with the population, or they don't believe it, and they should be saying that probably to Reform's voters. They don't believe this stuff, but they think you do, and so they're happy to sell it to you. And they think you're stupid enough to go for it. So they're laughing at you.
It's a really good point, actually, because part of my column was about how Reform's success lies in appearing not extreme and not strange and not eccentric, because they have to win Middle England over to win a majority.
Yeah.
So they have to be careful not to be dragged to the right on immigration by Restore, and equally not into these odd positions that are really niche among the British public on things like climate. But I think you're right to identify that maybe they don't necessarily believe it all, because when I interviewed Richard Tice when he was leader of Reform a few years ago, he really struck me, actually, because he told me...
He struck you?
He didn't strike me, don't worry. It's not that bad. He told me... I just remember it being a very striking interview because he said he was boasting about, I drive an electric car, he told me proudly, and he said he even went to the extent of saying it's really good because it's made me healthier because I don't stop at the petrol station for snacks, and he said he was a fan of renewables, and he said one of Reform's key policies under him would be to fix solar panels to 5 million plus homes using state subsidies, I assume. So he was really into all of this stuff.
Yeah.
And to have gone on that journey to now, it's got to have something to do, I don't know, maybe they've made some calculation about the demographics who vote for them, but I think it's more to do with where the interests lie in terms of their donors. Yeah. Our next category is Conference of the Week. Will you love a conference and you've been to another conference?
I can't help myself.
In the name of your art.
Yeah, I mean, I literally can't help myself because I get told to go to it's my job. But yes, so I went to the conference, the yearly conference of the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, or ARC, which the name sounds quite Neighbourhood Watch.
Yeah.
And I think there are elements of that in it. But what it really is
which is where, as Rupert Lowe, I hope
fairly
that he's got
traditional
one
values,
donor, one good
very
donor, that's good
faith-based. Some people there you might describe as maybe sort of Christian nationalists, quite a few of the kind of trad bros of the right. The people who are Christian, very much, there was a lot of talk about the West. It was really a festival of the West.
Judeo-Christian culture and all that.
Yeah. And it was all
wants to be a politician.
aesthetically a world away from MAGA republicanism.
Well, if he did want to be a politician,
but in that it was actually beautiful. It's the nicest I've seen Kensington Olympia look, because normally when I go there for like a trade fair or something, it's full of loads of little stands, sort of like all covered in all sorts of different stuff. This was just, it was all very, very white, all very light, very. I'm
sure it was very white.
I'm sure that's not what he wants to be. I'm sure that he wants to wear.
There was like a little art gallery there. There was, very tastefully laid out. A lot of hedge fund money there. Paul Marshall, the hedge fund manager who owns the Spectator and Untied, is the kind of main financial backer, as I understand it. And he also spoke about the West, and it's also sometimes talked about as the anti-woke Davos, and that seems to be possibly a line that's been created by the PR people for this conference, so they can compare it to Davos. But yeah, a real festival of ideas for people who believe in these quite strongly sort of traditional values, and where the sort of economic elite reaffirm their beliefs in what Britain should be and what the West should be.
Well, that was what was really interesting about the sketch, is that you're basically saying they're talking as if they're insurgents or as if they're the underdogs. Actually, most of these people, very wealthy and influential in terms of the media that they own or the positions they hold in political and public life.
Yeah.
That's quite jarring, isn't it?
It is, but I think it's also something we see quite a lot. As you see people in positions of power saying, "Oh dear, look at how we've been wronged."
Yeah,
I mean, you had, Kemi Badenoch was speaking there, Nigel Farage, but also a lot of these quite evangelical American speakers. They would talk about men's rights and young men feeling persecuted. There was a speaker who said, some men are doing really well, and I looked around and it's full of like men who are doing really well. It's full of rich people.
With expensive hair products and
and some great hair there. A few libertarian hats.
They don't come cheap.
No.
Market forces.
Yeah. My favourite quote, though, was there was an American guy who talked about the importance of faith and fighting for Christendom, as he called it. And he said, I don't know of anyone who died for secular humanism, which will come as news to the 10 million soldiers who died for the USSR in World War II. As in my interview with Richard Tice, there was a fair bit of, maybe not abject climate denial, but the description of action to stop anthropogenic climate change as a luxury belief, which really struck me as like the ultimate example of, oh, look at us, aren't we suffering in our hedge fund offices? Because surely climate denial is the ultimate luxury belief. You can only maintain that belief if you live in entirely air-conditioned existence.
Yeah. And it was on one of the hottest days of the year, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was
So literally people were talking about that with sweat running down their necks.
Yeah, it was like 36 degrees outside, but the air condition was roaring and it wasn't really coping with the heat. And there were these people talking about climate, net zero and climate change action as luxury beliefs. Incredible to see.
Well, my conference of the week, and I'm sure you're going to be heading to this one, Will, is something called Nudge Stock, which is organised by the Ogilvy advertising agency. It's in September, and they're introducing their speakers. We've got a seriously strong first wave of speakers to sort out your trust issues. And guess who one of those speakers is?
Who in the UK really embodies trust? Is it
Trust,
a British politician?
integrity. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It is a man who can break his own lockdown rules and then atone for his sins by eating a plate of kangaroo bollocks as penance. It's former Health Secretary Matt Hancock.
Mr. Trust himself.
Yeah.
Return of the Matt.
Yeah. Really, I was like, this is a good idea, actually. I like this. Matt Hancock talking about public trust. You get Ed Miliband doing a sales pitch for Log Burning Stoves. Andy Burnham speaking for the London Tourist Board. It's a good exercise, I think. It's a good discipline for our politicians.
Yeah. I would actually pay to see all of that.
I think we will be soon.
Yes.
We're already on to our last category, which is Demolisher of the Week.
Yeah.
Who's your demolisher?
So, my demolisher of the week is Heathrow Airport, specifically the new runway that has been approved by this government. And obviously there are people who live near Heathrow.
Then got people who are relatively moderate and